As a doctor, I've always believed in science, in things you can measure, explain, and prove. I've pronounced patients dead and comforted their families, certain that it was just a biological end. But one patient's death, that wasn't the end. It was the beginning. It was the moment I learned that some things just don't care about science or logic, and they don't stay where they belong. Because the entity that tormented her last days in the hospital, it followed me home. My name is Dr. Alistair Finch. For 15 years, I've been a doctor of internal medicine. My world was always one of charts, lab results, and diagnoses. The hospital was a battlefield of biology, a place where we fought death with scalpels, medicine, and intellect. The paranormal? That was just a fantasy stories people told themselves to make sense of the dark. I dealt in facts, tangible reality. My home was my sanctuary from all that. A quiet house, where the loudest sounds were my 2 young kids laughing, or my wife, Sarah, calling us for dinner. Life was built on order, on predictable patterns. The hospital was for sickness. Home was for healing. I held that line as an absolute truth. I never imagined that something from one world could bleed so catastrophically into the other, that a sickness of a different kind could attach itself to me like a virus and infect my own home. It all started on a Tuesday, with a patient in room 3B, a patient whose final moments would shatter my entire world. The patient's name was Eleanor Vance, late 80s, terminally ill with a cancer that had spread everywhere. Her case was palliative. Our job wasn't to cure her, but to make her comfortable. When I walked into her room that afternoon for my routine check, the air was just wrong. Hospitals have a specific smell, sterile, antiseptic, and you get used to it, but her room felt heavy, stagnant. It was cold too, unnaturally so, and it carried this sense of dread that settled in my gut like a lead weight. I've been in the rooms of dying patients hundreds of times. I've felt sadness and grief. I had never felt fear. Eleanor was frail, just a whisper of a woman lost in a sea of white sheets. Her eyes, cloudy with cataracts, were wide open and fixed on the far corner of the room, near the ceiling. I followed her gaze, but there was nothing there. Just smooth, white plaster. "Eleanor?" I asked gently, moving to her bedside. "How are you feeling?" She didn't answer. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. That feeling of dread in the room got worse, pressing in on me. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in total darkness. I put my stethoscope in my ears, leaning in to listen to her heart. The beat was thready, a faint drum counting down its last rhythm. As I listened, a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature snaked right up my spine. Suddenly, Eleanor went rigid. With a strength that seemed impossible for her tiny frame, she shot upright in the bed. Her bony finger pointed directly at that same empty corner. A scream tore from her throat, so raw and full of pure terror it froze the blood in my veins. "My God!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "They have no eyes!" Her words just hung there in the air, vibrating with horror. Before I could even process it, her body went limp. Her head fell back against the pillow. On the monitor beside her bed, the steady beep of her heart flatlined into one long, piercing tone. I immediately called a code, and the room flooded with nurses. We went through the motions, that familiar, desperate dance of resuscitation, but it was no use. Eleanor Vance was gone. After I pronounced her time of death and the team cleared out, I stood alone in the quiet room. The oppressive dread was gone, replaced by a hollow echo. But her last words were stuck in my head. "They have no eyes." I looked at the corner one last time, half expecting something. Nothing. I told myself it was a terminal hallucination, a final, fearful misfiring of a dying brain. A rational, scientific explanation. It was also completely wrong. The strangeness didn't stop. A few days later, I was on the same floor with another patient nearing the end. The room had that same solemn feeling, but this time, something else was there. A palpable heaviness settled in the air, the same suffocating dread from Eleanor's room. I tried to shake it off, blaming it on memory. I draped my stethoscope around my neck and leaned over the patient to adjust their morphine drip. In a flash, something cold and strong grabbed the tubing of my stethoscope. Before I could even react, it was ripped from my neck with shocking force. It flew across the room and clattered against the far wall. I spun around, my heart hammering. The room was empty, except for me and my sleeping patient. There was no draft, no reason for what just happened. A nurse heard the noise and poked her head in. "Doctor, everything all right?" I couldn't explain it. I just mumbled something about tripping, grabbed my stethoscope and got out of there, the feeling of being watched boring into my back. That night, I went home, desperate to leave the hospital behind. I tried to just sink into the comfort of my family. I played with my son, read my daughter a bedtime story, and sat with Sarah on the couch, talking about anything but work. But a piece of that cold dread had followed me home, like a splinter of ice in my soul. The first incident at home was small. We were getting ready for bed when Sarah couldn't find her purse. She swore she left it on the kitchen counter. We searched everywhere. Finally, I found it sitting in the middle of the living room floor, a place neither of us had been. We just brushed it off. We were tired. A simple mistake. But deep down, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. A week later, things started to escalate. I was in my home office catching up on paperwork when a sudden, sharp cold just enveloped me. It was the same bone-deep chill from Eleanor's room. Then, my phone, which was sitting on the edge of my desk a good foot away, suddenly shot off and clattered onto the floor. No vibration, no alert. It was like it had been swatted by an invisible hand. I just stared at it, the rational part of my brain scrambling for a reason. A muscle spasm? Some bizarre static charge? Every excuse felt flimsy and pathetic. Then the activity started to center around our kids. My 6-year-old daughter, Lily, began talking about a shadow man in her room at night. I told her it was just bad dreams, an overactive imagination, but then I started hearing things. Faint whispers from the baby monitor after our son was sound asleep. The distinct sound of Lily's bedroom door creaking open, only to find it shut tight when I went to check. Sarah was getting more anxious. She was noticing things too. The TV turning on by itself. The smell of that sterile hospital antiseptic scent would suddenly appear in our hallway and then just vanish. My attempts to rationalize everything were wearing thin, even for me. I was a man of science, living in a world that was defying every law I knew. I felt this creeping responsibility. I was there for Eleanor's last moments. I was there when my stethoscope was thrown. This all started with her. The horrifying thought took root. This wasn't just a series of coincidences. This was an attachment. Something had latched onto me at the hospital, and I had brought it home. I had opened the door and invited a monster into my house, and now it was turning its attention to my family. The final illusion of normalcy shattered on a Saturday night. Sarah and I were woken up by loud, rhythmic bangs coming from downstairs. It sounded like someone was pounding their fist against the living room wall. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a big flashlight from my nightstand, and crept down the stairs, my heart pounding. The moment my foot touched the bottom step, the banging stopped. The house was silent. Still, nothing was out of place. I checked every window, every door, all locked. As I turned to go back upstairs, a child's giggle echoed from the kitchen. It was high-pitched and cold, completely devoid of joy. My blood ran cold. It wasn't Lily. It wasn't my son. It was something else. Something pretending. The laughter faded, and I was left standing in the dark, my scientific mind in ruins, replaced by the primal terror of a father who knows his family is in danger from something he can't see, fight, or understand. The breaking point came 2 nights later. It was well past midnight, and a fragile sense of peace had finally settled over the house. I was lying in bed, just staring at the ceiling, my mind a mess of fear and disbelief. Sarah was sleeping beside me. That's when I heard it. A faint, almost inaudible sound from down the hall. It was the soft tune of the musical mobile above my son's crib. We never wound it up at night. A wave of icy dread washed over me. I slipped out of bed, quiet as I could, and padded down the carpeted hallway. The music got a little louder as I approached my daughter Lily's room, its gentle melody now twisted into something sinister. I pushed her door open a crack. The room was dark, except for the pale moonlight filtering through her window. Lily was fast asleep in her bed. And then I saw it. Standing in the corner of her room, between the window and her bookshelf, was a figure. It was tall and impossibly thin, a column of pure, concentrated darkness. This wasn't a trick of the light. It was a void, a shape that seemed to drink the moonlight around it. It had a vaguely human form, but it was stretched, distorted, like a shadow pulled into a horrifying caricature of a person. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was paralyzed by a terror more absolute than anything I had ever known. As my eyes adjusted, the most horrifying detail came into focus. It had no features, no clothes, no hair. Just a smooth, featureless head on a lanky frame. It was a monument of silent malice. The shadow figure stood perfectly still, its attention fixed on my sleeping daughter. A surge of protective fury cut through the fear. This thing, this entity, was watching my child. It had invaded my home, terrorized my wife, and now it was here, in her room. The scientific part of my brain was gone, burned away by a father's rage. "Get away from her," I whispered, my voice a choked rasp. Slowly, unnaturally, the figure's head swiveled towards me. It still had no face, no eyes, but I felt its gaze lock onto mine. A wave of indescribable cold and pure hatred washed over me. It felt like a predator sizing up its prey. It took a slight step forward, its form seeming to ripple. That single movement broke my paralysis. With a guttural roar that was more animal than human, I lunged into the room and slammed my hand on the light switch. The room was flooded with the warm yellow glow of Lily's bedside lamp. And the corner was empty. The figure was gone. Lily stirred in her sleep, murmured something, and rolled over. The air was still cold, thick with a residual wrongness. I just stood there, shaking uncontrollably, gasping for breath. The rational doctor was dead and buried. In his place was a man who had just seen the impossible. The monster was real, and it was in my house. The aftermath of that night was a blur of frantic whispers. Sarah woke up to find me sitting on the edge of our bed, my head in my hands, just shaking. When I told her what I saw, describing the shadow in Lily's room, all the color drained from her face. There was no more skepticism, no more trying to find a logical reason. We were finally united in our fear. The thing I saw wasn't a dream. It was an intruder. My world, once governed by evidence, now had no firm ground. How do you fight something that isn't there? How do you protect your family from a shadow? My medical training was useless. My scientific mind felt like a liability, constantly trying and failing to find a logical foothold. An overwhelming guilt washed over me. I did this. I brought this home. This was my fault. Desperate, I did something I never would have considered before. I remembered a colleague mentioning a friend who was a paranormal expert, someone who specialized in spirit attachments. I'd scoffed at the time. Now, I was digging through my contacts at 3 a.m, my hand trembling as I found the number. Making that call felt like a surrender, an admission that the world was far stranger and more terrifying than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. When I spoke to the man, a calm, steady voice on the other end of the line, I'd just laid it all out. The patient, the stethoscope, the purse, the shadow in my daughter's room. I expected him to think I was crazy. Instead, he just listened. When I was finished, he said something that chilled me to the bone. "Doctor," he said, "from what you're describing, it sounds like when that patient died, you inadvertently opened a door, and something came through. Something has attached itself to you." He came to the house a few days later, walking through the rooms with a calm, focused energy. He confirmed what I already feared. A negative, inhuman entity had followed me from the hospital. It was drawn to the energy of the dying, and my presence at Eleanor's death had built a bridge for it to cross over into my life. He performed a cleansing, a procedure of smoke and prayer that felt a world away from the sterile procedures of my operating room. He explained that these things feed on fear, and that my standing up to it that moment in Lily's room was the first step in taking back my home. But he couldn't guarantee it was gone for good. He said some attachments just fade, while others lie dormant and wait. It's been 6 months since the cleansing. The house is quieter now. The obvious activity, the thrown objects, the sounds, the apparitions, has stopped. The oppressive weight of dread has lifted, and my home feels like a sanctuary again. My daughter doesn't talk about the shadow man anymore, and the nights are mostly peaceful. We're trying to piece our lives back together, to rebuild the sense of safety that was so violently stolen from us. But I'm a different man. The unwavering certainty of my scientific worldview is gone, replaced by a reluctant, fearful understanding that there are other, older truths in this world. Truths that don't show up in a blood test or on an X-ray. When I walk the halls of the hospital now, I feel the unseen energies of the place. I see the fear in my patients' eyes differently. I no longer see death as just a biological end. I see it as a doorway. And sometimes, that door can be forced open from the other side. The entity might be gone, or it might just be waiting. My family is still affected. We all sleep a little lighter. We all look over our shoulders in the dark. Sometimes, when I'm really tired, I'll catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, a ripple in the air, a shadow that's just a little too dark. Is it my mind playing tricks on me, a leftover symptom of trauma? Or is it a reminder that I was once a host, and that a part of my uninvited guest never truly left? I don't have the answers. I'm a doctor, a man of science, who now knows for a fact that we are not alone. And I know that the most terrifying sicknesses are the ones for which there is no cure. The world is full of unexplained events, and hospitals, as places of such intense emotion, can be hotspots for them. Have you, or anyone you know, ever experienced something you couldn't explain in a hospital? Share your story in the comments below. And if you want to hear more accounts that challenge the line between science and the supernatural, make sure to subscribe. If you would like to know whether this is a myth or reality, then head over to the comments now